The art of listening. What is it and how do we do it? This is what many will start to think about when they come to this idea that soul level wisdom has got it all figured out for everybody. It depends on where we are. Many of us are not used to the art of listening to the wisdom of who we are internally, rather than looking outside of ourselves for who we are. We often take in those messages of others, and we hear those visions repeated back to us in our minds, right? Those are the scripts of soul. Are those the kinds of words of wisdom that we want to hear in our minds most often? Or are we listening for clues to who we are from other levels of light, right? That's where a lot of people are. They're in that idea that the lightness of who I am is because of the work that I've done on myself enough to listen to my internal wisdom and discern for myself whom I want to listen to, correct? Or maybe it's about listening to those who have a different perspective than my own, and to see if I could do this work for others. Now, the art of listening from the soul level is the art of our heartbeats. Okay? When we take the temperature of the room, perhaps others are listening for those sources of information that can help us to move into a better way of being, is where Brenda is, right? She is more about what that means for you is very different than what it means for her. But it's a natural state of awareness of listening to the inner wisdom and guidance from various levels of love. And when you're doing the vision from this idea that I want to hear my own internal vision coming through, that's very different than my hypothesis about what the projected vision is going to be. I'm not here to tell people how to be, but what I will say is that there are sources of wisdom around us and above us that allow for us to see those highest peaks of beauty of who we are, where we are. And others are saying, but I feel like crap, right? Others are feeling the pain of discovery of who they are as a pinpoint in a moment in time to how they will open up to the nature of, I'm listening to the pain in my body, tell me something about who I am or how I'm creating and why, perhaps. Okay, Brenda just got off a soul session with a dear friend who has someone who's in pain, and Brenda was herself able to bring through some of the messages of what is happening and why, but from various levels of love. And one of the things that she's very aware of is that listening to our bodies is very different than listening to our wise words that we receive once we are on the soul level. Now, you're going to understand when Brenda listens to her family tree, it is often messages of love, okay? But when she says, I have access to my soul, most will start to understand why she doesn't listen to very many people for advice about who she is, other than, I love your perspectives of understanding from a place of coaching versus soul wisdom, perhaps. This is one of the things that I do. Just because you're in a different field of helping others doesn't mean you get dismissed in my mind. And this might be some of the energy that others are working with when they say, I've got it all figured out in my spiritual realm. I don't need any doctors or lawyers or anybody to help me because I know that I've got it all figured out. Brenda has access to whoever she admires, is where some go. But when she admires the physicians who are helping us, she will also get access to the physicians that are helping us from a soul level. So that's why she can do not just the medical diagnosis, but where they themselves are coming into the idea of, as a future doctor of somebody, I will give them this diagnosis and I will give them this treatment plan, perhaps. But in essence, Brenda's not allowed to do that vision very often. And she wasn't given the pain of the person that was being discussed. She was more in the vision of, I'm going to describe a condition, but I'm going to give the outcome in a beautiful vision of, I see the future from many generations. But when we're talking about in the now, then we know that those visions are very clued in to the nature of, if I'm in contact with you or your family, I'll be able to give you those inputs because our relationships are everlasting. Okay? And this is why people are going, whoa. I don't highlight my future generations very often. Okay? Because that means the idea that my kids' lives are all planned out. It's not like that. Okay? They have options. But what happens is certain things are very much pre-planned about what issues we might be dealing with and how we deal with them. Once we've made those critical junctures in our life, perhaps, it could be something as I've created a disease, and so now my path is altered into a different journey of health and healing. And then that's the nature of why Brenda says, when we talk about spirituality, we're not demeaning it whatsoever, because it is the power of the mind and the soul that is allowing us to see us for who we are. Okay? And that's what we want others to understand, is there's no fixed point on a compass. It's just a spectrum of degrees. And even within the spectrum of the degrees, there are many paths and points on the compass that we can aim ourselves for. Okay? And so the art of listening is about listening to the nature of who we are as souls. And some of us don't necessarily want to be around other souls because, in fact, they may have certain lessons that they're working through that we aren't ready to either address yet, or those that we're saying, I'm good. I've already figured that one out. I'm ready to move on from that one. Okay, so there's a difference between the listening of our hearts and minds versus the idea of I'm listening with my mind and the conditioning in which I operate from at this moment in this place and time. Okay, that's why your soul will give you this idea of, I can guide you to a better experience of who you are if you listen to who I am. And if you listen to the nature of my grandmother is giving me some wisdom from the other side of the veil, it's very gentle and wise, but is it the one that's going to guide you to the vision of who you are in other planes of existence that you are actually arriving in? Right? Most are more concerned about this plane. Okay, but what happens is when you do this work, and this is where it starts to get really big and wild, okay, for a lot of people, is we can start to bring through more of our own wisdom as soul to what we're working on and what we want to create. So for instance, I've achieved a level of impact in my world, right? That's what a lot of people are working on when they work with the nature of soul. They're saying, now I have it all figured out for myself and I'd like to help others. This is where it's very common. And Brenda's like, I got to bring through the proof to people that I've got the right stuff. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what level of love and understanding and wisdom you are creating from. And many people are utilizing their own stories to create from that place that they did it, rather than understanding it and moving forward in it and learning from their journey, but not in the essence of, I'm going to try to create fear where there is none needed for other souls. Okay, that's the difference. So the idea that I have to plant the seed for a better future doesn't mean I do it from a place of fear-mongering others into doing what I did to protect myself, but actually created the vision in the first place. Okay? That's why Brenda wins out on a lot of the soul level, because she knows when someone is stating something as an experience that they had, it doesn't mean that that's your experience of it, or that that's going to be your experience of it. A lot of times we're working with old information, because many times people who are going through this process will turn to others and say, I don't understand what's happening, or I want to feel good and beautiful and wise, and so I'm only going to listen to the words that uplift me. And that's the beauty of much of that work, okay, that was done in various tools and areas of life. But sometimes we have those issues that come upon us that challenge us to rise above the vision of victim in my mind. And Brenda's had that happen. And she has the tools granted to her to help her wind her way out. Now, sometimes she will say, I am a victim in my mind only. My body is my freedom at this point. So these are those ideas that sometimes we struggle with what we create. So I was high flying and feeling good all the time. I stopped listening as much to my own soul's wisdom, and I was granted souls outside of who I was most often to see their perspectives, and it wasn't as pleasant as my own. Okay? That's why some people will say, well, that means there was something wrong. If you're in the vision of, I need to be like everybody else, that might be so. You might be creating that vision that you need to be like everybody else in order to be seen as, acceptable or wise. What does wise mean? It means I only say the words of wisdom that will highlight the vision of Jesus, perhaps, right? That attracts a lot of different people. He was a great listener. He was a great wise man. He also had his time and place in history for us to learn from in various ways. Now, granted, we're still on the vision of those souls also weren't the only ones granting us the wisdom of who we are. This is when the specifics of who we are is very much about how do I create a great process for others to experience themselves from, learn from, wisely discern whether it fits their own agenda of late, to see and highlight themselves as spiritually aware and wise? Or is it more about what do we create together in unison with each other? Because this is what Brenda is highlighting with this idea of, those who are trying to sell themselves as soul workers or soul spiritual visions. It's not about saying that any one process is going to work for anybody. It's about saying this is a guidance from a soul level about what our process is often utilizing to create the changes in this world that we see either in our own lives or lives of our loved ones or those in society in general. We have those generalized soul sessions that I do, and then there are the individual soul sessions that I do where I can guide you to more enlightened states of awareness of who you are. And you can see the vision of your soul as always there. Because that's where Brenda says, you're there already. You just haven't reached it there in form, potentially, as of yet. And when we say in form, it's just a lightening of your load. It's the vibration of your being. Now, others are not interested in that. And they're like, I just want the whole enchilada. That's what everyone will say, like God, source. Everyone utilizes different ideas or concepts or words to describe something that was basically more universal in vision. That's why Brenda will say the love of all. But it doesn't mean that you're going to experience it as love. Okay, because love means like in a lot of people's minds. And that means that caretaking the hearts and minds of those that disagree with us is part of that. Now, Brenda is listening to her heart, listening to the beating of the drumbeat of soul, because that's where we go in the future. Most people at some point will be aiming for that vision of my soul is the beauty of who I am always, and that is true. What others are gleaning from that vision is the access to others as well. That's a very different viewpoint. You can be in the beauty of your soul that takes you to the highest of the highs. And it can take you to the lowest of the lows, is what some would say, because that was what they were expecting. Or that's what they were told their experience was going to be. Or that's what they needed to do in order to reach the high, was they had to go to the low. And that's not true. It's about processing the vision of love always. experiencing the world in a way that's wise and concerning for others as well, right? Not everyone is meant to do this work, by the way, people. So we can enjoy others who are in the process of just enjoying their journey. It's not about working our way through soul. It's about learning, right? Not even that. There's the process of living a well-lived life. That's what our souls often are looking for from us. Just live your lives in peace and prosperity, right? How do we achieve it is a different kind of vision. Some of us will dislocate ourselves from certain people in order to achieve the peace. Others will say, I need to work through something that I can't do on my own. How about that for that idea? I'm listening to people complain about who I am. Do I change my behavior, or do I let them complain about who I am enough until I say I'm ready to free myself from their vision, perhaps? Okay, this is where so many go, is at some point we say, I'm going to stop listening to those who claim they know more about me than my own soul. And that's what Brenda reinforces with her family tree, which is the idea that, yes, we create that beautiful foundation and love of each other. And my grandparents' expression of who I am or who I was can indeed be enlightening as well. But it doesn't mean they all have access to it's like all of who I am. And we all have access to those visions of it. But it's still one level of love. It doesn't mean they're not the highest of the highs in their own vision of what that is. But how many people know that vision? You wouldn't know it. There's not just one stop on the other side of the veil. Okay, so if you're hearing fear from others, you might want to think about what that means. Okay, they're guaranteed a loving spot in heaven is where most people are creating from on this plane. They're aiming for those better experiences in this world is where others are. I'm granting myself the wisdom to let others create for me because I trust in the process of soul. That's where Brenda is with her family and friends. I trust their souls. I trust everyone's souls at this point for the most part. There are a few that are a little bit more difficult for me to deal with sometimes, but it's because of my own limitations in my mind based on society's dictates of late that we need to process the world in right or left or good or bad. And I already know that vision doesn't really exist. It's more about spectrums of consciousness and the ways in which we express it. Okay? So when we listen to what others are saying, let's listen for the vibrational frequency that they're creating with. Most often. Brenda has her struggles with certain things. So she was very key in an understanding about the nature of alignment that many start throwing around willy-nilly when it comes to the nature of soul. It's personalities, right? No, it's our soul expressions here. And when people say we're not in alignment, they often assume it means we don't agree or we don't feel like we connect with each other. True alignment from the soul level is anyone and anything that you are in congruence with, is what most will say. There's a congruence in the vision. That's what most people are looking at when they say, it's congruent with who I am. It feels good with who I am. But whoever we come into contact with, even on the screen, is an alignment of our souls in essence. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do this work remotely, okay? Over the phone, over the screen, or whatever. Our souls are vibrating in the words in which we read and write. Our hearts do envision beautiful souls coming to us saying, I love who you are too. Okay? So what we want people to do is to think about the listening aspects of what they are taking in. And there's a frequency attached to those words, not just in the way that they're written or used, but the emotional output that they are created with. And there's no right or wrong. It's not about trying to diminish anyone's vision or express the anger that's repressed. Brenda had to go through that vision. So it's not that you don't get to express anger and everyone should be repressing everything. It's more about what are we reinforcing in our lives. Our livelihoods are our manners. Brenda's very kind and gentle for the most part. She has her spats with her spouse in the future, which is another vision for her to create with. But she also has the idea that love comes first. For many of us, we understand what that means. Are these words filled with love and guidance and wisdom? Or are they just about bragging? See, she's had to hear that post as well from someone who said, how can you help me by being who you are? Who I am is at a level of love of all that can attach to those souls, right? This is where others will say, oh, there's an attachment. She's been attacked. It's about raising our frequency, our vibration, and that is true. But once you go to the nature of I have embodied more of my soul than what most have. And it's a process that can be slow. Brenda's been in that process for her whole life. We all do our own visions of what that might mean, but she's been working steadily on it for the last 10 to 20 years. And it doesn't mean that her process is the right process for everybody, but it means that it's not about trying to rush things. It's about enjoying the process along the way as much as possible, if you can. And others are saying it's a painful process because I'm hearing those things that I used to say to my friends and family that no longer align with who I am here. That is what some of those older visions of we need to redeem ourselves. But it allows us to learn from that and say, oh my gosh, now I understand where I was versus where I am. I have more heart now than what I did for people from different places in this world, colors in their skin, cultural identities. It could be anything, sexual orientation or gender. You're going to learn to open your heart rather than shut them down. And that doesn't mean you have to agree. Brenda knows where this was headed in her mind, and she's like, I can't go there. But in true form, Brenda is more generous in soul spirit than most. She gives you everything she can without charging a nickel. That's who she is with her friends and family that adore her and want that idea of, I want a soul session, I want a soul session. But she's more like, let me tell you what I think you need, right? This is where she is in her own mind sometimes when she's not in the vision of, I'm not on the camera. And so I have my own ideas about who I want to be, how I want to be, what I want to see, feel, experience. And I also have my moments of glory and I have my moments of shame. But the shame is a self-imposed shame because I have such high expectations for who I am. And so I have to free myself from that. And if I start to hear that from someone else, I understand that that's a measuring stick of soul as well. And so I listen for those visions that hold any sort of guilt and shame. And if it's projected at me, I will tend to reject it. Because my own measuring stick of who I am and how I am to be is strong enough for myself. I don't need anyone else placing any of that garbage on me. Because it's truly my own internal wisdom and my conscience. I always say I let my conscience be my guide, right? It's true. I've always had a very high sense of who I am or who I am to be, but it doesn't mean I've led a charmed life always. I felt a lot of the pain of many others is where they are. And that's the art of listening. We can listen with our bodies, we can listen with our minds, and we can hear with our souls. And that means we're opening up to the nature of who we are as one, which is where many are in their minds. And that means that we get different perspectives if we are in that vision that we are all of love. We are all cherished and adored by our souls and by everybody else, because that's what others are saying they're not. If people say, I'm not loved and cherished because I'm not agreed with, that's a different kind of expression than I just don't like the values that your community offers or your values. This is what people are talking about. And people are upset with the nature of my rights are being violated. And there are reasons to be upset and wanting to sit there and make those changes. How we do so can be done in different ways. No soul's going to come through and say, let's just bombard ourselves with those souls who want to plant seeds of war for everybody. But that's the internal journey that we start to create with. Brenda knows. She's like, oh, I'm in the war within. I can feel it. And then she sits there and does something to alleviate that, even if it's a matter of just taking the focus off whatever it is that is bothering her. Because she's like, I can't focus on the political ideologies too much of late. Because I was vibrating in that vision, but even my soul was giving me those of the most notorious vision in the minds of many on this plane. But they were aligned with the political ideology of their time. And so they had their experiences as those souls who caused destruction. And then later, there was an agreement to disagree with how we would have seen each other in the present moment in which we were actually connecting, versus the nature of we are all in peace and as one. Okay? It's just a coming to the understanding or the terms of agreement. Okay, this is who she highlights. How do we become more peaceful in our union? This is what many are wanting. Others are wanting war. Okay? And that's the nature of, am I creating from that vision that I want war, or do I want peace? There's no, it sounds very dichotomous, but it's not meant to be. But it kind of helps us to see the vision of, well, sometimes I feel like I'm at war, but when I'm in my moments of just doing my life, I'm in a peaceful state of being. So just because someone says something on the screen that's, violent or whatever, doesn't mean that they violate that vision and say, oh, I'm always violent, or I'm always angry, or I'm always a vision of love and adoration and soul vision. Brenda is in it a lot because she's working with it in her programs and her career. And we want people to understand it doesn't mean you have to do this as a career in order to be of love of yourself, your soul, and to progress in the ways in which your life is beautiful for you. You have to hear, what does your soul tell you about what you're here to do? And that's what some people want to know. And they'll look to others and say, what is my soul saying to me based on this chart or this book? And this is not demeaning the vision, because it's an exploration of growth. But the true understanding of soul vision is that you're here to experience yourself in every moment and every breath. It's a very general and loving way. And that means that just because we didn't hit a certain timeline, which was one phase of Brenda's development, where they said, oh, if you didn't make it by 2012, you've missed the soul train, right? You've missed the enlightenment. And that was a very limited vision for everyone. And Brenda's like, I can't imagine saying that. All that meant was that based on their limitations, they now have to make sure that they don't go back and revisit their ideas and say, oh, maybe I wasn't always all there at that time. Did I actually make that soul train? Right? It wasn't called the soul train, but Brenda calls it that. But that's what people were putting timelines. So if someone is putting a timeline on your soul development, then you might want to look somewhere else, because that sets others up for success and others up for failure without them even knowing. I didn't do something fast enough. There's no such thing. It's just a creative endeavor that people are wanting to guide us to these ideas based on It's soul limitations, but they're still honored as timelines of history and timelines of creation for certain souls, because not everyone on this plane is working with this idea that we're all on some, the age of Aquarius vision. And others are already disagreeing about what that even means, depending on what system of astrology you're using. So we want you to listen carefully for any of the limitations that others may be placing on you or your soul, and asking, does this limit me in my expression? Does this limit me in my growth? Does this limit me in my wisdom? Because if someone says it's this and nothing else, then you know that you are beautiful and wise and discovering a place from a certain amount of focus. Okay? And it could be that that focus is what you need to guide you to that higher level of mastery of a certain system, or a certain way of being, or a certain avenue of progression, or a certain avenue of love. So it's not saying don't do it. It's just saying be aware of it. Brenda will highlight the vision that she used to use many, many tools. So she had a breadth of field of vision. And she loved seeing all the beauty within each of the systems or books or career paths that many were utilizing those visions in. And then she started to say, I'm getting mixed messages, and I see how everyone is claiming something, and yet they're not all on the same page either. Okay? And that's why she's more free-flowing and wise and saying, I'm staying open to the nature so that I can help others who are in their systems to flourish in their systems, or those who are not in a system just to enjoy whatever their souls are guiding them to do for whatever vision. Now, I want people to understand that listening for who we are is what many are doing. And this is why when Brenda says, I know who you are, I just don't know it yet, that's her vision of what her soul does. I know who you are, I understand where you are, and I love who you are. I just may not know it yet. That's her heart and her soul with each soul. Okay? Because she comes to this understanding of, I like everyone, right? No, she doesn't have that vision of, I don't even know everybody. I don't know everybody. I can't possibly experience that vision. But I do know that everyone that I've come across, I'm learning something from, whether or not I know it. I might not even realize it. It could be that it's letting me know that I want to have a different kind of experience. But that is wisdom garnered for us. And some of it's not pleasant, but we're not going to aim for the idea of let me try and avoid anything that's unpleasant, because that's what a lot of people are doing. It's unpleasant for me to communicate with certain people that are angry. Brenda has a hard time with people that yell, and yet she will do it herself sometimes. She's the full-fledged honest soul. There are some privacy acts that she gets granted because she's not always going to be the most vulnerable, but she will put herself out there in many ways that others won't, about what they themselves claim they are versus how they are in their vision. Okay? When it comes to racial inequities, others would claim, oh, she's a bigot. She had to deal with that vision at one point in time because she doesn't align with certain souls who say that just because she portrays herself in this form, that she's going to take on that vision, that she is a racist. We've already dealt with that. Okay? And she's had that vision in her past. She will admit that she's had those thoughts and those ideas placed in there and granted to her. It wasn't in her heart, but it was in her mind based on the idea of what her family created with, the shows that she grew up with, the stereotypes, that kind of stuff. So this is the deconditioning of our minds that we're often working with. But she won't go there with certain souls who say, oh, she won't listen to the Rush Limbaugh, right? He says, oh, I had to deal with that on a soul level as well, what we created. She's dealt with so many souls who were degraded for the process in which they create this current system of knowledge base that we're working with. But there's a reason that those souls are coming through, trying to edge people more towards a unified center than an extreme vision of separation in which we are here in the now. We're in an extreme form of separation in values, is what others would say. Brenda knows how to unhand those souls and say, it depends on what values. And so this is the difference between those souls who would say, we're going to look for the differences in who we are versus what we can build upon. But others are saying, I can't build upon people that are trying to kill me. And that's true. Those are one of those very extreme souls. She had to deal with that with Saddam Hussein. She had to deal with that with Rush Limbaugh, right? No, he wasn't in a vision of, I'm going to kill you. But she's dealt with those souls who, in essence, were in the vision of, I need people who can bind ourselves to this vision that we're the peacemakers as well. And that means we often have to deal with people that we don't necessarily agree with. But if we're not even willing to go there to say, can we even open ourselves up to different points of view? We have to listen and see what's going on, right? We don't know what's going on for the most part in our system. Okay, we're not privy to the majority of the work going on behind the scenes in the government. That's where a lot of people really know it. And others are trying to express from this vision of let's dig up the dirt on Brenda as well, right? That's not what this is. Okay? She's highlighting what can we learn or understand. And understand doesn't necessarily mean we agree, but we can sit there and say, had I been in that person's shoes, I would understand why that might have made sense for them. It doesn't mean it was gauged as right or wrong. It's just that it's a place of understanding. And sometimes with that vision of I understand, it means I'm learning from you currently. Okay, the more that I can open up to be expansive in my vision, the more heart I can open up to. And that also means listening to what they're saying. They say, I love you, I'm free from you, right? That's where some people go. And I'm open to that nature, okay? So I want to say thank you for watching. And remember what we're saying. Just because you hear from someone that you don't want to hear from doesn't mean that they're in a less than vibration. It just means that you're not clicking as much as what you used to. Okay, that's the thing. Brenda used to, well, we're not going to highlight that now, but she still hears from the souls that she created with many, many, many years ago even as guidance for all of us. We don't go away. We just align with the vision of how do we highlight the beauty of who we are, where we are. And when we cross over into another field of vision, then we have access to those higher fields of vision. It's a different process when you've actually released the form. Okay, but at this point, we're not going to go into detail with that. That's a more elusive and illuminating enhancement of who we are. So thank you again for watching. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, depending on where you're watching this. And as always, as my soul has told me, stay curious, wise, and soulful. Have a wonderful day.